I spent a lot of time waiting for Romeo and Juliet to happen, and it didn't. What's up, guys? I'm your teen librarian, Gina, and this month you told me to read An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. Normally, this is the point where I would hold up the book cover so that you guys could take a look at it without the digital. However, it turns out that our copy wandered away without telling anyone. Thankfully, we do have access to e-resources like Cloud Library, so I was able to check out an ebook and get this read in time. Let's start by talking a little bit about the storytelling. This was written in first person, and I really prefer first person. I think it adds a little more mystery because you only know what the character you're following sees. So if they don't see that there's some manipulative plot going on, you don't know about it. And it makes things a little more interesting, I think. This particular story is a first-person dual narrative, so we have two main characters and it alternates back and forth. Each chapter follows a different main character between these two. The first of them is Elias. He is a marshal. He's pretty much in the elite of this society, and he is chosen to undergo some trials to name the next emperor. Our other plotline follows Laia. I know. Elias and Laia, it's a little confusing if you're listening to it. Anyway, Laia is a scholar. They're basically the lowest rung of society, and her people are pretty much little better than slaves. Her plotline follows after her brother gets arrested and thrown in prison. She needs help getting him broken out, so she goes to this scholar's resistance that's fighting against these warrior marshals underground, and they basically say, we'll help you out, but you have to do something for us. You have to pretend to be a slave in order to spy on the commandant of the martial school. And that's pretty much what she's doing. She's trying to get her brother free. She's trying to figure out what's going on with these trials and get information on the trials to get to the resistance. So we get these dual narratives between Elias's viewpoint and Laia's. And I think it did a lot to world build. We were getting a lot of information from two different sources, which helped flesh everything out without us needing to travel to places. We didn't need travel time. Like, Elias didn't need to get down to the city because Laia was already there, and we switched to her chapter and we see what's going on. So, and I also think because they come from different spheres, it also really helped to give perspective on how the elite of this society see themselves and how they treat the lower classes and how the lower classes see themselves and why they're rebelling. So I did really enjoy that. My favorite part of this book was not actually writing style. It was an intricacy of the plot. And this is a very character-driven book. We are going through what Elias is seeing and how he's changing. We're going through what Laia is seeing and how she's changing. But it's not about them. There's not a romance between them, at least not at this point, and that makes sense. I spent a lot of time waiting for Romeo and Juliet to happen, and it didn't. They're attracted to each other, but they both have other people that they're also attracted to that make more sense for them, honestly. But their relationship is not the focus of the book. They are the axis points for a shift that we can tell is going to come over and is currently coming over this world. But they're not romantically involved. It's not about their romance. And I loved it. Okay, now let's talk about some of the characters a little more specifically. I obviously mentioned Laia and Elias already. They are our main characters. I loved the growth in each of them. Laia went from being someone who thinks of herself as a coward, who had very cowardly actions at the beginning of the book, was very, I need to save myself. I am terrified. I am run. Her flight or fight instinct always went to flight. And by the end of the book, she's kind of come into her own. There's still room for growth, which I love. Obviously, this is the first book in a 4-book series, so hopefully there's still room for growth. But she has a lot more belief in herself and in her ability to affect change around her. So she's not relying on other people to protect her anymore. She's like, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. Elias, we also see a lot of growth from. He starts the book being fairly self-centered as well. He looks around him, he sees what the other marshals are doing, and he thinks it's wrong. But he's not going out of his way to stop it. He's one of those people that will see a slave being beaten and go, that's wrong, and then turn and walk away so that he doesn't have to witness it. He doesn't have to feel guilt for standing by and watching. But he's also not risking any consequences to himself by trying to intervene, which would likely lead to his death if he did it a few too many times. So you can kind of see why he'd have that mindset. But you don't change the world by turning and walking away. And you can tell he still really wants to at the end of the book, but he's not. He's honoring his word. He has freedom of spirit by that point, and he's no longer afraid of what the consequences will be for him for any choice he makes. He's more open to following his own path. Helene is part of Elias's storyline. She is another one of the martial students who is undergoing the trials. She's the only girl. Apparently there's like one girl per generation that undergoes this specific training that they have. And she and Elias have been best friends since they started their training when they were 6. Their relationship gets really awkward in the middle of the book and then kind of is transitioning to a new phase where Helene feels jealous, but she also still really cares about him. And so her loyalty to the Empire gets tested because of her feelings for Elias. She's not sure whether she should follow his lead or the lead she's been brought up with. At the end of this book, it's kind of both still. She's like, this is the last time I'll help you. After this, we're enemies because you are going against the Empire, you're going against the will of the Empire, and I serve the Empire. I think it's interesting that if you look at the book covers for the rest of the series, she's on all of them. Another one of the secondary characters that does not get anywhere near as much screen time as Helene, and probably won't going forward based on covers, is Kane. He is in Laya's storyline. He's one of the high-ranking people in the Scholars' Resistance. And again, he's kind of got that same test of loyalty that Helene does, except his is to the Scholars' Resistance or to these growing feelings he has for Laya. The final secondary character, I guess, that I want to talk about a little bit before we get into the antagonists of the story is Kane. He is an augury. He's one of these prophets that the marshals worship. When he's first described towards the beginning of the book in a conversation with Elias, I was totally picturing like Star Wars original trilogy Palpatine with like the hooded robe and the wrinkly face and the lightning hands. And then I got to the end of the book and I was like, oh, this dude's like Yoda. The main antagonist for this book is the commandant of the martial school. She is the person that Laya is spying on. She is the person in charge of churning out highly skilled little psychotic murderers every year. And she's also Elias's mother. And she hates him. Like, actively manipulating and working towards getting her son murdered throughout the book. Levels of hates him. She's very manipulative. She's well aware of the fact that she's living in a man's world and that the only way she's actually going to be able to attain the power she wants is through proxies that she manipulates into place. My first theory has to do with the auguries, actually. Laia gets told a legend by another slave in the commandant's household, and the legend basically goes that there once was a great scholar empire, and the scholars wanted to know everything about everything. So they'd go to these beings that are now considered mythical and find out all that they knew, find out all their secrets. And the most powerful of these beings were the jinn, and they refused to deal with humans. So the scholars continued to try, the jinn continued to refuse them, and when the scholars' empire began to fall, when they started suffering from famine and illness and war, they became angry at the jinn, thinking if the jinn had just shared this information with them, then they'd still be this powerful, this healthy place, this healthy country. So this group of powerful scholars got together and found a way to trap the jinn in what is essentially a living prison. And they trapped all of them except for the king of the jinn, who was understandably very upset about all of his people being imprisoned, and went to the marshals and taught them the secret of making basically the best steel weapons ever. And that's how the marshals were able to take over the scholars and oppress them, and as well as taking over several other peoples within their country. Now, I can't be entirely certain without going back and trying to find the exact paragraphs for each of these numbers, but I am like 98% sure that the number of scholars involved in trapping the jinn and then disappearing matches the number of auguries that the marshals see as prophets. So I think that the auguries are actually those scholars. My other theory is about the spy. We know in the story that the commandant has a high-ranking spy within the resistance. I still suspect it to be Mason. I believe that would be a really interesting twist. But I am actually, after having given it some thought, I am leaning more towards the idea that the spy might be Kane, actually. I also think it would be interesting. I'm not necessarily theorizing it. I'm just like, ooh, fanfiction, maybe. I don't know. If it turned out that Kane was the commandant's son as well, if he was Elias's half-brother, that would be interesting. I did really enjoy this book. I am interested to see where it goes, and interested in finding out more about the characters and about this world and what's going on in it. I do have the second book checked out through Cloud Library, so I have that on my phone ready to go, start reading it. But the story did not interest me enough to forsake everything else that I'm reading right now or that I'm interested in reading. If you enjoyed An Ember in the Ashes and the rest of the books in the series, I would definitely recommend Birthmarked by Cara M. O'Brien. Birthmarked is the first book in a trilogy that has a similar storyline to An Ember in the Ashes. If you enjoyed the aspects of An Ember in the Ashes that dealt more with overcoming society's expectations of you and choosing to follow your own path wherever that may take you, definitely check out Delirium by Lauren Oliver. Alright guys, that does it for this video. Thanks for tuning in, and thank you so much for recommending this and then voting for it. I really enjoyed it, and I appreciate your thoughts. I'd like to hear more from you, so if you want to let me know down in the comments or join me on Discord, I look forward to talking to you. And make sure that you like, ring the bell, subscribe, do whatever you need to do to make sure you're staying up to date with what's happening for you at your library.